How's it going, guys? Mark McNabb here for another episode of Top Speed Garage. This week, I'm in the 2014 Cadillac CTS. Now, this is pretty much an all-new car for 2014, and this is the first model year for the third generation car. And I can tell you from first-hand experience of the second generation car, this is even light years ahead of that, and that car was light years ahead of the first generation. Cadillac has really come a long way in both design and execution of luxury performance with the Cadillac CTS moniker. And I tell you what, this thing is a solid rival with any BMW or Mercedes out there. So kudos to Cadillac for that one. So what's new for 2014? Well, obviously the body. Looks are completely different, and man, it is a looker. I'm serious. There's like over 180 LEDs on the outside alone, so it looks great. It's got a very unique grille to it. There are very little, actually there's no carryover parts on the outside from last year. So this is a completely brand new looking car. It does look pretty fantastic. And I think that Cadillac does have a solid competitor as far as a looker to the BMW and Mercedes and even Audi competitors. So I would say A+ on the exterior looks as far as that. So as far as the interior, now again, solid effort on Cadillac's part for the interior. I have to say this is pretty much one of the nicest cars I've been in recently. There are leather bits everywhere, on the dash, the seats, on the steering wheel, on the shifter, everywhere. There are Alcantara bits right here on the door. There's even carbon fiber trim on the door, the dash, and even on the center console. So I have to say, it looks fantastic, and it feels just as good. Everything feels very meaty, very heavy, very, very quality under finger. So I have to say, it's a great feeling, great looking execution on the interior. Now, as far as function on the interior, okay, so a lot of people want to complain about the Q touchscreen and the haptic feedback for the slider switches on the center console. I haven't really had that much issue with it, and I think it just takes a little bit of a learning curve to figure out how to do it properly. I am really happy that there are manual physical buttons on the steering wheel for volume control, and I find myself using that quite a bit. There aren't any buttons for, let's see, like AC control, vent or fan speed, temperature, things like that. So I mean, you do have to have you do have to use that haptic feedback system for those functions. And really, it's not that bad. It just takes a little bit of a learning curve. So as far as the Q system, you know, it's just pretty much basically like every other GM infotainment system out there, like the GMC IntelliLink or Chevy MyLink. So if you're familiar with those systems, you know, they work pretty well. This is working just basically the same way. It's got the same icons on the homepage and everything like that. So that is really handy to use. Now, my tester comes with the 12.3-inch center display. This thing is beautiful, and it is customizable. So you can do like sport, simple. I think the other ones are called advanced or something like that. And basically, you can change the way your gauges look based on your preferences. And I think that is really a nice touch. The gauges look great. I've never had them wash out in bright sunlight, and they're just really, it's a solid look. And I prefer having the sport gauges with the digital speed readout in the center of the speedometer, the analog speedometer on the right hand side. So I find that to work the best for my preferences. There's one little bitty complaint with the gauge cluster. Where I sit in the car, where the steering wheel feels good for me, the gauge cluster is about a half-inch too high in the dash, so my steering wheel blocks it just a bit on the top part of the gauges. Now, if I sit lower, I can see fine, but then that makes the steering wheel too high. So I wish that the gauges were just maybe a ½ inch lower inside the dash. That way I'm looking kind of down at them and not down and under. That would make my user experience with that 12.3-inch screen that much better. Other things, really there's no complaints. Everything just works well. That 6-speed automatic transmission, the paddle shifters here on the steering wheel, they fall great underhand. All the controls here in the center work well. The radio, Sirius XM, works great. One of my favorite things is just these doors and how they feel and the controls that are under them. These doors are aluminum and they are very light, but when you close them they still feel that, that quality thump, like a bank vault or something like that. And these the door handles are great. When you open the door, it just feels light, and that's great. It doesn't feel cheap, it feels light, and that added lightness. It feels expensive, but it's light. Other things, I have this massive panorama sunroof. It looks great, and it also has that sunshade that comes over and blocks like 99% of light. When that thing is closed, nothing's coming through, and I think that's great. When it's open, it's nice and airy. It's a great cabin feel. It works well. Cup holders are right here, and it even has a motorized cup holder lid that I think is it looks fantastic. Whether it's useful or not, I think it's just kind of a party trick, but hey, party tricks are cool, so I'm not going to complain about it. Now there is one little hidden compartment inside this car as well. It's behind the haptic feedback panel. Push that little button, and there you see it rise up. I can push the button again, and there it falls right back down. So you can see that, there's pretty cool little features about the car that kind of make it interesting and different. And I think that kind of puts Cadillac a step above competition as far as, interesting things about the car. So that's the inside. Oh, what about what's under the hood? Well, my tester is complete with the 2.0-liter turbo. That's a 4-cylinder, but it produces 272 horsepower and 295 pound-feet of torque. Now, the torque is really the main story on this engine, I believe, because that torque is available at 1,700 RPM, and it stays there all the way to the 5,500 RPM power band. It's a torquey little motor. It seems to really work well in heavy pulls and things like that. The horsepower, yeah, it's there too, and at 5,500 RPM it ends, but it's good all the way up into that. Now that 4-cylinder, that is mated to a 6-speed automatic transmission with the paddle shifters. Basically, the engine and transmission combination work great. This 6-speed seems to shift exactly where it needs to, and I can hit the manual button right here on the top of the shifter, and then all my controls are right here in the paddles. And they seem to shift pretty well, especially when in sport mode. Speaking of sport mode, I have another little button right here on the center console. I can toggle between sport, tour, and snow and ice. And obviously I haven't gotten to try out snow and ice because it's Central Florida and the middle of summer. But sport and tour, there really is a big difference in between the two. Sport, obviously the steering, the magnetic ride control stiffens up, and the throttle and the transmission gear selector and transmission shifts all tighten up. And as far as tour mode, I can put it right down in tour mode. Everything kind of loosens up. It makes for a great highway ride. The magnetic ride control seems to soften up just a bit, so that way these little bumps and grooves in the pavement aren't really that noticeable. And it rides like a Cadillac. So I mean, it's plenty peppy for, the people who aren't going to track this car. Everyone else will find this car quite nice to drive. So, another issue of Top Speed Garage. Guys, please be sure to check out the article and read all of the stuff on it. Comment below, check out all the photos, everything like that, and be sure to listen for my further comments on this car and other cars on the TopSpeed.com podcast. You can check that out every Thursday on the site. Generally, it happens about noon. So, with that, Mark McNabb for another episode of Top Speed Garage. Take it easy, guys.